Good morning, everybody who's joining us right on time. We're going to get started here in just a moment as we let more folks join. All right, good morning, everybody. And again, we'll get started in just a second here as we let more folks join on. Thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, once again, and good morning. Thank you for joining John Burton Advocates for Youth today, and as we are very excited to release our report, What's Stopping California from Maximizing Federal Housing Assistance for Youth, a statewide analysis of housing choice vouchers for former foster youth. It's a mouthful, and we're really excited to go over all the details of the report here today. But first, quick housekeeping. In terms of this webinar today, if you have a question at any point, please use the Q&A icon on the control panel. The Q&A window will appear, allowing you to ask questions to the hosts and panelists. We will be having a separate Q&A section at the end of the presentation, and we will hope to address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Secondly, and I know a lot of folks are asking it already, and folks will be asking it throughout the presentation, yes, the webinar materials, as well as a recording of this webinar, will be posted on our website later today, and it'll be sent out to everybody who registered for the webinar. So you can look forward to receiving that in your inbox as well as on JBay's website. A quick agenda for today. So we're going to be, first of all, providing an introduction and overview to this report. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about the methodology and how JBay was able to conduct our research and discover our findings. We're going to be talking about some of those findings that we were able to discover both through a survey of child welfare agencies across California, as well as various interviews we did with child welfare agencies and public housing authorities. Based on those findings, we made some recommendations to implement at the local level, recommendations to implement at the state level, and then finally some federal level recommendations. And as I alluded to, we're going to close with a short Q&A section in which we're going to try to get to as many of those questions that you may have. And now some introductions of the presenters that you're going to be hearing from today. Again, my name is Andy Lomeli. I'm a project manager with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Joining me today are my colleagues Simone Turek-Lee, the Director of Housing and Health for JBay, and Amy Lemley, our Executive Director. And what we're going to be celebrating and talking about today is this new report, which has been issued today. It is official. What's Stopping California from Maximizing Federal Housing Assistance for Youth? It is available at this link, and I do believe my colleague Simone is going to drop that link into the chat as well. We'll be going over the details about this report, again, and some of the findings, and allow you all the opportunity to ask questions and hopefully get to some of those answers in the report. But now I am going to pass it over to my colleague Simone, who's going to provide the introduction, overview, and methodology for this report.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everyone. Let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to take us through sort of some contextual information here, and give some background on what we're going to be talking about today. So I think this is not new information to anyone on the webinar, but youth leaving California's foster care system face a pretty harsh reality. Here in California, we have the largest foster care population in the country. Just to, again, provide some context, a total of 51,485 children and youth are in our state's foster care system. And then close to 8,000 of them are young adults, so age 18, 19, and 20. And, while this is really, a fraction of our state's overall population, when it really comes to the foster care population nationwide, we do, California does represent a significant proportion. We also have the largest population of unaccompanied homeless youth. About 29% of the nation's population of youth experiencing homelessness, and that's both, unaccompanied young people and young people who are parenting, as head of household, that are, with their children, but not part of a family where they are a dependent of. And our state happens to be a very tough place to live for a young adult, if you don't have the support of family in some way or another. Whether it's financial or whether you just have a place to go when you have gaps in housing. As a young adult, most young adults are not earning enough money yet to afford housing in many counties in our state. Some young adults aren't necessarily working. They might be trying to finish school. And so, we live in a state where half the nation's most expensive cities for apartment rentals are here in California. So it is really, I think, when you talk to people sort of nationwide, we really are in a pretty uniquely challenging situation in terms of housing cost. And not having when you're coming out of the foster care system, not having a fallback plan when you have gaps in housing, not yet having a rental history or credit history just by the sheer nature of your age, and then not having a willing cosigner really does kind of present a pretty challenging housing situation, and really underscores the importance of having rental subsidies and other types of housing support for this population specifically in our state. So that's sort of why we're all here and why we all care, right? Let's move on to the next slide. So the federal government, recognizes this challenge for sure, and they've done this through kind of making some of their housing assistance specific to youth leaving foster care. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, is the acronym for that agency, has included youth transitioning from foster care in its housing choice voucher programs. So historically, this was done through what's called the Family Unification Program, or FUP, and then more recently through the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative, or FYI, which really built on FUP. So I think most people are familiar with housing choice vouchers, or what more commonly called Section 8 vouchers. And there are a number of special housing choice vouchers that are for specific populations. And so in 1992, FUP really began as an effort to address the housing needs of child welfare involved families. But then there was also a leg for a second sort of subpopulation of youth who were leaving foster care themselves. So not that we're part of a child welfare fragile family at that time, but that were independently, in foster care, or had left foster care. And so for young adults, FUP, would provide a time-limited voucher that offers 36 months, so 3 years of a housing subsidy, which is the voucher, coupled with supportive services. So then fast forward, that's been going on since the 90s. We definitely never had, enough FUP vouchers to meet the need, either on the family side or on the young adult side. But then fast forward to 2019, and a group called the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Coalition essentially launched an initiative. This is a group of current and former foster youth led by Action Ohio and the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. And they worked with HUD to develop what is now the FYI program. So the young adults in this coalition developed FYI really to be responsive to the specific needs of young people leaving foster care. So they kind of envisioned this new administrative process for requesting and receiving vouchers, where they can be accessed on a rolling basis. And we'll touch more on that in a moment, but that was really what was at sort of the core of this initiative, was how are we going to end homelessness among youth leaving foster care? This is a preventative thing. We know when youth leave care, we know who they are. Sort of, this is stoppable, this is preventable. So what this group envisioned was really made into federal law, and the law was sort of named after this coalition, the Fostering Stable Housing and Opportunities Act. And that's the acronym for that is FSHO, FSHO. So you'll hear us refer to FSHO throughout the webinar because that's the federal legislation that established FYI. So let's go on to the next slide. And sort of what is FUP and FYI? Like, what are youth literally getting? So first, I'll just say, just because I feel like this question is going to probably come up, we're going to use FUP and FYI sort of interchangeably in this webinar for the purpose of trying not to confuse people. Some people refer to these vouchers as FUP. Some refer to them as FYI. They're essentially the same thing. It's just really a timing issue in terms of, FYI being newer and introduced in recent years. But we're going to just call them FYI/FUP vouchers to make sure that people know that we're talking about sort of both, whether you call them one or the other. Eligible young adults are between 18 and 24. So you have to have not yet turned 25 at the time you sort of sign your housing assistance contract. And the young person has to have exited foster care or, so have a closed case, or are still in care, but exiting within 90 days. So, at that transitional sort of close to exit point. And they have to be at risk of or experiencing homelessness, which is a very broad definition, just by leaving foster care or leaving, transitional housing program, even, or having a certain income. Like, there's a lot of ways to qualify under that at-risk category. And so just also another clarification, in California, any young person who has a court order for out-of-home placement, whether they're supervised by county child welfare or county juvenile probation, they are considered foster youth for the purposes of eligibility. So probation supervised youth with placement orders would be eligible. So want to also just make that clear. So I think I mentioned before, but FYI FUP provides a time-limited voucher that offers 36 months of a housing subsidy coupled with supportive services. Those 36 months can be extended an additional 24 months, so for a total of 5 years, through participation in what's called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, or FSS, or via participation conditions, very similar to extended foster care. And we'll talk about that a little later in more depth. So HUD provides the vouchers to the public housing authorities, who must have a letter of intent or an MOU with the public child welfare agency. In California, we're a county-run system. So these are county child welfare agencies, or here they could also be county juvenile probation departments. And then so the housing authority provides the youth with the voucher, which is that rental subsidy. Then the county child welfare agency, the public child welfare agency, either provides or secures the supportive services that are optional for youth, by the way. And the services are, both the upfront sort of services necessary to successfully secure housing and lease up, like housing navigation or covering the costs of security deposit and move-in, things like that, what could be called transitory costs, as well as kind of ongoing, more traditional supportive services like case management, life skills counseling, education, employment support, et cetera, et cetera. And there are two processes to request and receive vouchers, one being the new one I referenced with the establishment of FYI. Let's talk about that on the next slide. So like I said, FYI was designed to prevent youth leaving foster care into homelessness through this unique request process. So this really centers around preventing youth from becoming homeless who leave care. First, on the left, we have the more traditional, familiar, kind of historic competitive process that a lot of funding goes through, where there's a NOFA or a NOFO released, usually once per year. And then the housing authorities across the US apply for these vouchers. They can apply for a minimum of 3 or a maximum of 75. And then the awards HUD makes are based on, the size of the housing authority's existing housing choice voucher program, as well as the size of the eligible population. So that's sort of the process I think people are probably very familiar with. what we really want to make sure people are aware of today, part of I think, if you like, if you leave with 3 things from this webinar, this is one of the 3 things we want you to leave with, is that there is a newer process, and it's a non-competitive process that was, kind of dreamed up by these young people who wrote FYI, who developed it, and it is now federal law. And it's an on-demand voucher process. So, and it's likely that because this innovative sort of process that was developed is working, it's likely that it'll spread to other vouchers. But for right now, this is really only for youth vouchers. So these are called on-demand vouchers because they're literally provided on demand, on a rolling basis, on an as-needed basis. When an eligible youth is identified, or a group of eligible youth are identified, the county child welfare agency or probation department sends the housing authority their information, the young person's information, and says, I've verified their eligibility. This young person needs an on-demand voucher. The housing authority then fills out a very simple online form to HUD. It submits it, and then HUD turns the voucher back around in a couple months, tied to that specific person or to those specific people. So it's not, you're not applying for kind of vouchers for somebody to be determined later in batches. You're getting vouchers assigned to specific people who need them. So housing authorities, through this on-demand process, can request them in batches as small as 1 and as large as 25. And then you can get up to 50 each fiscal year. Each federal fiscal year, each housing authority can get up to 50 on-demand vouchers. And this is in addition to any of the competitive vouchers they have. So they could get awarded a bunch of competitive vouchers and then turn around. And once those are used, then you request the on-demand vouchers. And I should also say, once a youth sort of moves through their 3 or more years with the voucher, it's recycled back into the housing authority's inventory to issue to another young person. So let's move on to the next slide. One thing I did want to also just make known is that this is a follow-up report to a previous report we issued. And I wanted to share this because some of the information that we'll draw on today will compare today's data to 2021 data. This is the report that came from. So we kind of knew, as a state, these vouchers were being underutilized. We want to better understand the rate at which California communities were accessing them back in 2021 and sort of what was preventing us from fully utilizing them. So we did a similar, issued a survey to county child welfare agencies, did some research to understand what was going on. And what that research uncovered is that the number one obstacle for county child welfare agencies was that the supportive services that they're required to offer or secure were not funded. So let's move to the next slide so we can talk a little bit about that. There are a few state and federal policy developments that have happened over the last couple of years that have changed the game for FYI and FUP. So one is related to what I just said. To really try to tackle that obstacle where there was no funding for supportive services, which made child welfare agencies reticent to take this on with housing authorities. We worked with Assemblymember Phil Ting and the state legislature to establish some designated funding for this purpose. So the state augmented an existing program, the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, adding $8.7 million to what was originally a $5 million budget, so that counties could serve the then 870 youth with vouchers. So that report we did uncovered about 870 youth had there were about 870 vouchers in California, matched that with the funding. So that was happening at the state level, and that was done in 2022. And then at the federal level, there were significant developments to remove obstacles. First, there was this sort of pesky minimum voucher utilization rate. So it was required that housing authorities, before they could request additional vouchers, they had to have this minimum 90% utilization rate for all of their FUP and FYI vouchers, including the family FUP vouchers. So a 90% utilization rate means that at any given time, at least 90% of the voucher holders are leased up. And in California, you can imagine, in many of our counties' housing markets, leasing up is not a quick process. And so many did not meet this minimum rate and couldn't take advantage of that on-demand request function. And so thanks to our friends that do federal advocacy, like National Center for Housing and Child Welfare and others, HUD, they worked with HUD, and HUD issued a new notice stating that there's now an exception to this rule. So that was a huge obstacle removal. And then lastly, another significant federal development that, the amendments to FSHO require housing authorities to inform youth of the availability of this 2-year extension I mentioned to FUP and FYI. So youth can access this through participation in that program I mentioned, Family Self-Sufficiency Program, or through participation conditions. So next slide. So now we're through all the background. Everyone knows what we're talking about today. Let's sort of dive into what we've learned this year. So we issued the report that Andy shared earlier, and it's based on sort of what you see here on the slide. We did a statewide survey of county child welfare agencies between kind of over the summer and very early fall. 37 of California's 58 counties responded, and that they represented, just to give context, 85% of our state's non-minor dependent population, so kind of really the bulk of the population, and they possess 93% of our state's FUP and FYI vouchers. And there were 4 counties that we didn't end up getting full responses from in the survey, but we did gather their voucher numbers so that this is a complete statewide count as of beginning of October, which this is an evolving thing. So we could be a little further along as of today, but that's where we were just almost 2 months ago. We also have been since February leading a community of practice focused on FUP and FYI. We are doing this in partnership with the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. Their founder, Ruth Ann White, has been partnering with us on this effort. And so we have a kind of combination of state focus and also a federal expert who can speak to sort of, or I'll say national expert speaking to FYI, who helped develop it. Like I said, we launched in February. 15 counties are participating. And then the third thing we did was interview, kind of ad hoc interviews with a number of county child welfare agency representatives and representatives from housing authorities. Next slide. So a little bit more on the community of practice. There are 15 counties participating. You can see them on the screen. I definitely want to do more than just put them on the screen, though. I want to say their names out loud. These are, to their credit, these are these are people who are saying, in my county, in my community, we want to do better, and we want to master this, and we want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of these federal resources. And there's, volunteering their time, their agency's time to participate in this community of practice to do that. So it's Alameda, Butte, Contra Costa, LA, Marin, Nevada, Orange, Sacramento, San Francisco, San Joaquin, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Sonoma, and Stanislaus. So we want to just applaud these counties for their participation. And it's not just the child welfare agency, it's the housing authorities. It's also sometimes service providers if they contract for services. And in a couple cases, the homeless continuum of care, because they're kind of part of the community as a referral partner. So the community of practice consists of individual technical assistance sessions and also these peer learning sessions with the full group. So those peer learning sessions are topical, and you can see on the screen what the topics are. They've been all virtual with the exception of our kickoff in February, which was a lot of fun and was great to see people in person. Andy Lomeli, who you just heard spoken, he leads this community of practice. And so if anyone has questions about it, I encourage you to reach out to Andy. So now I think let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it to back over to Andy to kick us off about and talk about what we learned from our survey.
Thanks so much, Simone. And again, we're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and hopefully we'll be able to get to them at the end of the presentation. So bear with me, as you gotta press hard on this mouse to click through to the next slide. Our first finding that we wanted to talk about today is that since 2021, the last time we did this analysis, the number of FUP for vouchers for youth and FYI vouchers in California has increased 54% from 870 to 1,341. As you can see demonstrated in that graph, it's about a 54% increase. And again, this is as of October 1st, 2023, and what the various representatives from child welfare agencies reported to us via survey as well as interviews. Secondly, we found that a total of 35 county child welfare agencies, or 60% of all county child welfare agencies in California, partner with at least one public housing authority to administer FYI or FUP vouchers to youth. Again, 35 of these 35 counties, 86% partner with one local housing authority, 11% partner with two housing authorities, and then 3% or one county, it's our biggest county in California, LA, has a partnership with 3 different local housing authorities. This, of course, means that 40% of our counties, or 23 counties specifically, currently do not offer FYI or FUP vouchers for youth as of October 1st, 2023. And lastly, just that a total of 42 total public housing authorities in California currently administer FYI and FUP vouchers for youth. Critically, we saw that PHAs, or public housing authorities, in 9% of counties have requested at least one on-demand voucher, and housing authorities in 3% of California's counties have received a voucher through the on-demand process so far. So again, PHAs in 3 counties have recently requested on-demand vouchers and are waiting to receive them from HUD. And then 2 counties have requested and have received those on-demand FYI vouchers. The 5 counties that have utilized this function thus far are Contra Costa, Nevada, Orange, Sacramento, and San Francisco. And that, of course, means that 53 counties have not yet taken advantage of that function and put in a request for on-demand vouchers. Next, the FYI and FUP vouchers for youth are concentrated in the most populated parts of the state. So we talked earlier about those 35 counties that are currently offering these vouchers. They are currently home to 93% of the state's non-minor dependent population. That means, of course, the remaining 23 counties are largely rural and tend to have smaller populations of foster youth. Of course, we'd love to see them be able to offer these in the future. And that moves me to my next point, which is that among counties with FYI and FUP vouchers for youth, the average number of vouchers per county is 38. And that number ranges from anywhere between 1 and 202. So again, some of those smaller counties we've seen, El Dorado, Kings, Napa, and Plumas, they all have 1 voucher for youth. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we see again our largest county, Los Angeles. They currently have 202 vouchers. And across those counties, those 35 counties that offer vouchers, the average number of vouchers is currently 38. As of October 1st, 2023, 300 youth were on a waiting list for FYI or FUP voucher. That figure is largely unchanged from June 2021. So as you'll see on this graph, in 2021, the time of our last analysis, there were about 290 youth on a wait list in California. That number has grown a little bit to 300. At the same time, we've seen this more than 50% increase in the number of vouchers offered across California. The number of youth waiting for vouchers it has increased despite the 54% increase in the number of vouchers. This, of course, suggests that the demand for vouchers has outpaced the increase in voucher inventory. Now, I do want to point out that this 300 youth on a waiting list does not necessarily capture the full demand, because not every county reported keeping some sort of wait list. Of the 35 counties that offer an FYI or FUP voucher, 13 reported maintaining a current wait list. The largest wait lists were in Santa Clara and Los Angeles, with about 100 people on those wait lists each. Next, we saw that 3 county child welfare agencies that offer FYI or FUP vouchers conduct landlord recruitment and provide landlord incentives. That, again, is 9% of all counties that offer vouchers. and they are engaged in some sort of partnership that is going to directly engage in landlord recruitment or secures living units for youth with FYI and FUP vouchers. That, of course, means that 91% of counties do not currently engage in that process. All right, next, in terms of timing, we saw that in almost all counties, it requires about 1 to 2 months or more for youth to successfully identify housing. You see in this graph, it's about 45% of counties reported that it takes about 1 to 2 months. Next, 29% reported about 3 to 4 months. 13% reported 6 or more months. 10% reported about 5 to 6 months, and then just 3% or one county reported that it took less than a month to secure that housing. And when we talk about identifying housing, what we mean specifically is the amount of time the housing search or selection process takes, beginning from a time a rental unit is actually secured. Again, starting with that selection process. All right, and the next finding is that counties that provide FYI and FUP services through a variety of arrangements, they contracts with community-based providers are the most common. So we see a breakdown here that 50% of the counties that provide FYI or FUP vouchers provide those services through a contract with a CBO. Next, we saw that 13% of counties provide those services directly, and then just 7% of counties provided through another public entity. That could be through the Public Housing Authority, through the community of care, etc. And then lastly, we saw that 30%, just about a third of all counties, provide services through some combination of those. So through a CBO and a public entity, through a CBO or directly, etc. Next, we saw that representatives from roughly 2/3 of county child welfare agencies that offer FYI or FUP vouchers were unaware of the opportunity to extend the vouchers from 3 to 5 years. Again, thanks to recent amendments in the Vouchers Act, we saw that youth are able to extend the life of their voucher by an additional 2 years, from 3 to 5 years, if they participate in FSS or they meet additional participation conditions. So again, in FSS, if they participate in that program, which is provided by the local housing authority, they must execute an FSS action plan. The voucher holder must be employed. They could provide or coordinate services. And lastly, the FSS program is going to establish an interest-bearing escrow account where increases in voucher holders' rent from increased earned income result in a credit to the escrow account, which that voucher holder will receive at the end of the term. That all falls under the FSS program. And then secondly, if the local housing authority does not offer FSS, or if the youth has attempted to participate in FSS, but certain challenges have arisen and they just, for some reason, have not been able to participate in that FSS program, they're still eligible for that extension by participating in some sort of education, workforce development, employment, or there's other exceptions as well. If they have a child under 6 and they care for an incapacitated person, or they have participated in a drug or alcohol treatment, or they have a documented medical condition. Again, the Vouchers Act requires this on the housing authority front. We see that housing authorities are offering FSS, but there is a lack of awareness about this extension opportunity amongst the child welfare agencies themselves. All right, I am now going to pass it on to my colleague, Amy, who is going to talk about some of the findings that we discovered in those interviews.
Thank you very much, Andy. You know, with the survey data collected, it really gave us the opportunity to try and explore what was behind these numbers. The numbers are very interesting, but like, what is motivating them? why are we seeing low utilization of the on-demand process? What is going on? And so that's really was the purpose of the interviews. And we want to send a special thank you to all of the housing authorities, child welfare agencies, community-based organizations that took the time for us to explore this issue. So let's start with the first finding from our interviews. Next slide, please, Andy. The first one is really many county child welfare agencies and public housing authorities really remain unaware of the on-demand voucher request mechanism. We can see that in the data. Only 2 counties have secured on-demand vouchers. Another 3 have requested them, but it, is still a minority of counties. And we really, from talking to them, this is such a different process than the kind of more conventional process to receive public funding that they remain unfamiliar with it. We also learned that the really significant policy changes that Simone went over at the beginning of the presentation have not quite reached communities. The issue of the voucher utilization rate, that was still raised as something where there's some confusion, people not quite being clear that there is a way around that, as well as the availability of supportive services funding. And so again, more information, more communication is required, and that's part of the purpose of today's web seminar. Next slide, please. We also learned that county child welfare agency representatives are still strongly communicating to us in the interviews that even with the increase in the housing navigation and maintenance program, there is still not enough funding for the supportive services. As Simone talked about, the housing navigation and maintenance program was increased by an additional $8.7 million, and that did clear the service, the number of young people with vouchers in 2021. However, we have had this 54% increase, so we're kind of back in the same place. So once again, they want to utilize this program. They want to bring this critical federal resource to their communities, but supportive services are required. And so, that is a tension that we heard about in our interviews. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next challenge we heard about is really the time-limited nature of these vouchers presents some unique challenges. And this is really what we heard about more from the housing authorities, but they highlighted some challenges for landlords, the housing authorities, and young people themselves. Let's start with the landlords. So housing authorities shared with us that they work with landlords to secure rental units, and they prefer longer-term tenants. They want to avoid the very real costs that are associated with tenant turnover, such as maintenance. And they also fear that when, they want to avoid any costs related to eviction. So when this voucher expires, the tenant is still in the unit, and they, are reticent about what will that require as a landlord when that voucher expires. And so there is some reticence there. The housing authorities also shared from their point of view, their concern, this is the only voucher they administer that is time limited. The hundreds of thousands of vouchers that they administer in California, we have over 300,000 housing choice vouchers. Only this one special set of vouchers is time limited. And so one thing they raised with us is, they're not used to tracking individual vouchers. And so they have to track these vouchers to determine when they time out. Then they also are just very unclear what to do with a young person when the voucher is done. They express concern, what happens if a young person still needs housing support? How can we help them? And that's just some concerns that were raised. And that kind of relates to the youth concern is, it's not clear that 3 or 5 years is enough time. And so the time limited nature there raised some questions. And so these are just kind of practical operational things that may be playing a role in the in the rollout of this program. Next slide, please. Another really key factor that was raised over and over is really these escalating housing costs and a scarcity of landlords that are renting to voucher holders. And so, housing affordability is one of the most significant barriers that young people confront when they are attempting to secure housing. And these young people are competing with other voucher holders that are older, who have a credit history, who have tenancy history. And so, together between the escalating housing costs and the kind of competition, it's a very practical challenge that voucher holders are experiencing, along with the child welfare agencies and the public housing authorities that are supporting young people. Next slide. We also really learned, we went to some parts of the state where this is being done particularly well. And we said, how are you doing it? How are you getting these units? How are you making this work so well? And what we learned, and we asked public housing authorities that are doing it well for FYI and FUP, and we also asked housing authorities that are doing it well for other types of vouchers. And what we learned, I think we knew it, but we appreciate it at a whole nother level, is the importance of landlord engagement. And that landlord engagement is a core competence of a public housing authority. Again, these housing authorities around the state have tens of thousands of vouchers, and housing authorities, they are measured on their utilization rate. They have a very strong motivation to have high utilization rate. That is kind of how success is measured. And based on that, they've developed very strong core competence in landlord engagement, because landlord engagement means utilizing those vouchers and having a high voucher utilization rate. So what does that really mean? And this is kind of what we learned more than anything. It's these very practical approaches, such as a signing bonus, modified tenancy requirements. So let's say, for example, a young person or any tenant has no credit or no tenancy history. These types of bonuses to incentivize taking tenants with these that need different tenancy requirements. A risk mitigation fund that covers damages and lost rent. So again, you're a property owner, having access to that risk mitigation fund, so that if something goes wrong, they know that there are some ways to recapture some of that lost money. A small repair fund to help a unit pass the required housing quality standards. Again, this program is a rigorous program. It's a high quality program, and units can't just be any old unit. They have to pass these housing quality standards. And so by having a housing authority have a program to help the property owner pass those standards, that's another element of landlord engagement. And then holding fees. These are fees that can be paid to the landlord to hold that unit while a voucher holder is completing to go through the process, so that it's ready and they're able to hold it until the next voucher holder can use it. So we really enjoyed learning about these things. We enjoyed, kind of knowing how well they work in the eyes of public housing authorities. And we just heard loud and clear that public housing authorities they've done this for a long time and they do it very well. Next slide, please. The other thing we really learned from our interviews is there's a fundamental incompatibility between the county child welfare agency's claiming process and the state funding that is intended to provide the supportive services to young people who have vouchers, and that's the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program. So, the reality is young people who are utilizing FYI FUP vouchers are working closely with their local child welfare agency, and the funding for HNMP is administered to county child welfare agencies from a different state agency than these county agencies are really used to working with. Instead of the California Department of Social Services, the California Department of Housing and Community Development is the state agency that administers HNMP. And, you know, in a nutshell, we won't bore you to tears, but they do it a little bit differently than most county child welfare agencies are used to. And as small of a thing as that may seem, these slight changes have resulted in significant delays. First, the county child welfare personnel, they're really unfamiliar with HCD's allocation process, which is very distinct than the allocation process that's used by DSS. Counties are very familiar with how DSS allocates money. HCD simply does it differently. HCD has a quite lengthy process that requires multiple steps, including county resolutions. Again, county child welfare agencies aren't used to doing that. And then the final piece of the puzzle is many county child welfare agencies use a cost reimbursement model. And that's really based on, you know, drawing down 4E. Well, this is unfamiliar and frankly somewhat burdensome to HCD. HCD is more familiar with a kind of lump sum allocation, not a cost reimbursement. And so together, these factors have really delayed the distribution of this supportive services money. So we really learned about that. We heard about that from the counties, and we really heard about it from HCD, who is working incredibly hard. I just want to emphasize to push this money out, taking a lot of time and effort to get these resources to county child welfare agencies. But these are some practical barriers that the interviews kind of discovered for us. Next slide, please. The other thing we learned from the interviews is the statutory languages about the purposes of the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program has really resulted in some confusion among county administrators. So when this program was established in 2019, it has extremely broad, non-specific kind of language. And you see on the slide what it is right there. And this, you know, while in one way you could look at it and say, wow, we can kind of do a lot of different things with it, it has actually worked to the opposite effect, that it's not giving local administrators the kind of confidence that this money can be used in certain ways. And so that is a practical barrier. We have, can we use it for this? Can we use it for that? We're not clear because the language is kind of overly broad. And we find that they are somewhat reticent to use it because for purposes that may seem maybe what they're concerned about is like outside of the scope of the intention of the program. Next slide, please. Also, a really key factor that we want to emphasize is the local and optional nature of this program. We believe is a key reason why it's been utilized. You know, what we have is a federal program that interfaces with very local stakeholders. And there has really been a limited role of the state government. And in California, we are used to the state having a very central role. The state issues ACLs, the state issues ACINs. County child welfare agencies look to the state for its policy guidance. But here is the area where we really have an absence of the state. And so, you know, whether or not a local jurisdiction implements this program is completely discretionary, despite the fact that it's in everyone's interest to maximize this very valuable federal resource. And so that is one thing we really uncovered through these conversations is there is kind of a accountability gap. And what it's really resulting in is a high level of variation across the state in terms of where vouchers are available. And that really raises some serious equity concerns. You know, whether or not you're fortunate enough to be able to utilize this is really not consistent statewide. And so we really, you know, noticed that this kind of from the $30,000 foot level of the federal government all the way down to a very local level of local administration, something is being lost there. And that is one key factor we believe in why the program's underutilized. Next slide, please. The last thing that I'll say here is, that child welfare agencies in large counties do experience challenges in securing partnerships with multiple public housing authorities. So in the report, I'm really excited about the report, and what we're touching on here is really a thumbnail sketch of the report. We do ask everyone to really take a good look at it, but one of the things I love about it is in the back of it, it lists all of the housing authorities. And many jurisdictions, I mean, LA has 20 PHAs. Every one of those, 20 times 50, I mean, that's how many vouchers. But we're experiencing some challenges in securing those partnerships for a lot of different reasons, back to the supportive services. But that is also a factor, is some larger counties have tried to establish these relationships and have been unsuccessful, and many activities and efforts are underway. So I don't want to say it doesn't exist at all, but given the number of counties that have multiple PHAs, it has been a challenge to establish those. All right, next slide. All right, so with that, those are the kind of findings that we drew from our interviews, and between the survey and our interviews, we've kind of stepped back and said, from our vantage point, we have a few local, state, and federal recommendations that we'll share with you, and I'll turn it back over to Andy, who will share the local recommendations.
Thank you so much, Amy. So again, I'm going to walk us through some of the recommendations that we can implement at the local level, again, amongst local child welfare agencies and housing authorities, to help make these vouchers more accessible to youth that are in need. So we're going to start off with the fact that we want counties to maximize the use of the on-demand FYI process, which would allow for the administration of 50 vouchers per public housing authority annually, as Amy was just alluding to in the most recent finding. The non-competitive on-demand mechanism for requesting FYI FUP vouchers enables each PHA to request up to 50 vouchers annually on top of any competitive FYI or FUP vouchers that they may already apply for through the competitive NOFA. We again found that awareness of this on-demand feature is scarce, as only 9% of counties across the state have utilized the on-demand process. Again, those are those 5 counties that we referenced at the start of this presentation. The on-demand nature of FYI and FUP makes them a unique and critical tool for social workers and probation officers. And frankly, increased awareness and utilization of this feature, which makes these makes the potential for these vouchers so ubiquitous, increased awareness and utilization is necessary. Next, we're going to recommend that each county refer every youth to FYI and FUP as part of the 90-day transition plan. California requires a 90-day transition plan for non-minor dependents that are exiting foster care. In these meetings, several different topics are discussed, including housing, and we recommend that FYI and FUP vouchers are part of that discussion because they are authorized to be provided to youth who are 90 days from leaving foster care. That aligns perfectly with that 90-day transition meeting. This is particularly useful in counties where there are waiting lists for transitional housing. All right, next, and we talked about this finding earlier with some counties having multiple housing authorities. We recommend that each county child welfare agency develop partnerships with multiple PHAs in some of those larger counties to maximize the number of vouchers that are available to youth. So again, larger counties tend to have multiple housing authorities. Each one of these housing authorities is allowed to request up to 50 on-demand vouchers per year in addition to those competitive FYI FUP vouchers. So again, a lot of counties, maybe there's 2 housing authorities, 3 housing authorities. Some of the larger ones, that number is closer to double digits. So we recommend establishing those formal partnerships with as many PHAs as possible, which will increase the number of FYI and FUP vouchers available to youth in the county. Next, we want to ensure that child welfare partners and other relevant stakeholders are aware that youth must be offered the opportunity to extend the FYI FUP voucher to a total of 5 years. The Federal Fischel Act requires that housing authorities inform youth of the provisions that allow them to extend the life of their voucher from 3 to 5 years through participation in FSS or by fulfilling certain participation conditions. We found that well over half, or about 65% of respondents from county child welfare agencies were unaware of this requirement and this potential. Now, we did see that housing authorities were compliant with this federal mandate, but we think that knowledge of this opportunity amongst all relevant agencies, including child welfare agencies, including service providers, can help to bridge communication and make sure that this extension is facilitated upon, and this could prove invaluable in providing youth the opportunity to be better prepared to transition into permanent housing by making sure that every single one of them can utilize this 2-year extension. And again, we're throwing a lot of numbers around, just to make sure extending from 3 years by 2 years to a total of 5 years. All right, and next, we recommend that youth are transitioned from an FYI or FUP voucher to a non-special purpose housing choice voucher at the conclusion of their voucher term. Again, FYI FUP vouchers are time limited to 3 to 5 years. This can present youth with housing challenges when their voucher ends. And we've talked about it a number of times in this presentation. I'm sure you're all aware of it. Cost of housing in California is what it is, and there is limited income for these young adults that are aging out. Federal guidelines do permit public housing authorities discretion to establish local preferences to reflect the housing needs and priorities of their local community. That in turn means that counties and housing authorities can ensure the safety and well-being of former foster youth who are transitioning out of the FYI and FUP voucher after 3 to 5 years, transitioning them to a more permanent housing choice voucher to help bridge those housing needs here in California. All right, next, we want to encourage local counties to explore options to fund supportive services with a new and exciting California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal or CalAIM program. This is a very exciting new development for Medi-Cal in California. CalAIM is a statewide reform effort to expand the number of allowable services funded by Medi-Cal to provide a more holistic take at individuals' health. CalAIM can fund services, including case management, that address and prevent homelessness. Stakeholders should spend some time learning about CalAIM, its local application, and how the program can be used to fund supportive services for youth with FYI and FUP vouchers. And the last local recommendation I'm going to talk about today is we want to encourage local counties to ensure equal access to FYI and FUP vouchers for youth that are exiting the juvenile probation system. Youth who have an out-of-home placement order from the juvenile probation system are eligible for FYI and FUP vouchers. Many juvenile probation systems, however, are unaware of this eligibility, and a lot of them are going to lack formal relationships with their local housing authority, who again is going to be receiving and administering these vouchers. Youth from the probation system can be served either via referrals through an existing partnership with child welfare or by establishing that relationship and a separate independent referral process with their local housing authority. County probation departments should be educated about FYI and FUP and encouraged to be encouraged to pursue partnerships with local housing authorities. That is going to be it for local recommendations. And I am now going to pass to my colleague Simone to talk about some of those state level recommendations.
Thanks, Andy. Hello again. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So we talked a lot about the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, or I should say, Amy talked a lot about it in the findings. So here we have some thoughts on how to kind of strengthen things from that side. So the first recommendation here is to modify the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, or HNMP, which is a lot quicker to say, to include funding for housing authorities to conduct landlord engagement, modeled after emergency housing vouchers. So to unpack this a little bit, so you learned that landlord engagement is kind of certainly like a secret ingredient, and is in the wheelhouse of housing authorities, not so much child welfare. Just 9% of counties that offer FUP FYI vouchers conduct landlord recruitment, and that's sort of understandable. They are not housing agencies, so we really want to think about who is best equipped to do this, and it's probably on the housing authority side. So they could do that directly. They can do it by contract, and they already do it in a lot of cases, right, for other programs that they administer. So to kind of look at what's worked that exists, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 included, had a $1.9 trillion relief package. It included $5 billion for new emergency housing vouchers, and sort of due to the urgent nature of the relief during the pandemic, each emergency housing voucher was accompanied with what they called a services fee. The services fee was designed to help facilitate a successful lease up. It was equal to $3,500 for each emergency housing voucher allocated to a housing authority, and it could be used for a range of activities supporting successful lease up. So signing bonuses, a vacancy fund to cover costs while a unit awaits initial inspection, damage mitigation fund. I know Amy sort of talked more in depth about some of these strategies. This was how the emergency housing vouchers, the EHVs, this is how they leased up more quickly during the pandemic. And we interviewed a number of housing authorities that cited the success of using those strategies, like Amy shared. And the services fee and its a potential, applicability to FYI and FUP vouchers. When you think about it, we've heard today, FYI and FUP vouchers are harder vouchers to lease up at times, for a number of reasons. And so, for vouchers that are more challenging, deploying something like landlord incentives makes a lot of sense. We know that it's worked with other types of vouchers to address challenges. So one strategy would be to replicate, based on the success of EHVs, and to really augment the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program budget to include funding for this purpose. So to include funding specifically for housing authorities modeled after the services fee concept. And then, of course, to do that, we'd expand the eligible applicants for the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program to include housing authorities. Right now, it goes to county child welfare agencies. Next slide, please. So the next recommendation is also about the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, but it would be to increase funding for the annual budget for county child welfare agencies as well. So Amy mentioned, just the need for more of that funding. HNMP was augmented in 2022 to specifically provide designated funding. So it's great that we have that now, but we also needed to match our sort of the level of vouchers that we have, for one. The establishment of this funding has really been key to counties being willing to request more vouchers, to in partnership, obviously, with their housing authority, and to being willing partners, because it equips them with the resources to hold up their end of the bargain. So they report they need more funding. We know that the number of vouchers has increased from 870 to 1,341. We have a waiting list of at least 300 youth. We know that's an understatement. And we want to be able to request more vouchers beyond even those 300 youth on the waiting list. So, the last recommendation was about expanding Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program to provide landlord incentives. This recommendation is about providing more funding for services. And this can all be achieved by increasing the Housing Nav budget. So for this recommendation, we suggest increasing the budget by at least $10 million just for county child welfare agencies, because that would allow us to serve the 1,341 youth, the youth on the waiting list, and an additional 235 youth. And that's based on similar annual growth that we saw between 2021 and 2023. So that's sort of one idea there. And then to put some additional funding on top of that on the housing authority side was the previous recommendation. So next slide, please. So adopt policies that result in housing navigation and maintenance program funding being allocated to counties within 6 months. So you heard a little bit about the challenges with administration. County child welfare agencies historically have received funding from Department of Social Services. They now receive, there's 3 different transition age youth programs that the Department of Housing and Community Development administer. And they are eager to, and so are counties, to getting the administrative process as efficient as we can get it, right? But it's still new. It's still a new relationship between these 2 entities, county child welfare and HCD, and there's gonna be hiccups. And so I think we're trying to work through those hiccups right now, and get to a point where this is working really smoothly. And so we want to see policies adopted that would speed up the allocation process, for one. And some ideas for how to get there could be adding a deadline in statute that would perhaps give the state and the counties some additional authority to do things differently in administration. We could remove the requirement that counties secure a board resolution, maybe in statute that could be done. And we could require that counties receive the funding up front instead of using a cost reimbursement model. So these are sort of some of the ticky-tacky in the weeds discussions that I think are going to continue to roll out this year to figure out how exactly we can all improve this, whether it needs to be a statutory change or something administratively. But I know that we'll get there because all parties want the same thing. So next slide. So this is about aligning the housing navigation and maintenance program, like the language in state law, the statutory language, and subsequently the program administration materials with the program's legislative intent. So this one's kind of simple. When the legislature first established this program, it had very broad language in statute. It didn't really state what the kind of very detailed purpose of the program was. And so what that results in, obviously, is HCD, the administering state agency, they look at statute and they create their program materials. And so it translates into broadly stated program materials. And so we've all talked a lot with county child welfare agencies about the intent of the program, but that sort of doesn't matter when what's in statute doesn't reflect that. So we really need to get those worlds aligned. When we amended the program or augmented the program in 2022, the language remained broad. And so I think we've realized that it would behoove everyone to make the language reflect what's actually the intent, which is the first $5 million was intended to assist youth in independent placements and foster care with identifying housing. The $8.7 million augmentation was intended to assist youth with housing vouchers. And so let's just say that in statute. So that's what that recommendation is. Next slide. And this is the last state recommendation, and then we'll move on to federal. But so this one is to issue state policy guidance to county child welfare agencies to inform them about FYI FUP and request that they implement it. So, although FYI FUP is a federal program adopted at the discretion of local agencies, there are ways that specifically we think the California Department of Social Services could play a helpful role in promoting access. Given their relationship with county child welfare agencies. On the most foundational level, this would include, disseminating information about FYI and FUP to county child welfare agencies and probation departments, which I think there's been openness to, at the state level. And back in 2018, CDSS did issue an all-county letter, and this was prior to the availability of on-demand vouchers. It advised counties that, transition services for foster youth include assisting non-minor dependents with locating and securing appropriate aftercare housing, such as transitional housing and FUP vouchers. So they did sort of make the availability of that program known in that ACL. And then in 2021, CDSS drew on federal relief funding to launch this $4 million pilot program, providing funding to counties to provide services to youth with FYI and FUP vouchers. So I think the state clearly recognizes the importance of these vouchers, and we're hoping to work with them to issue some updated guidance. You know, things have changed since that initial guidance was released. It could be helpful for the state to issue new guidance focused on the availability of the on-demand vouchers, as well as the availability of annual housing navigation and maintenance program funding for services. They could mention the extension, since there's a lack of awareness about that. And then lastly, the state could also choose to play a heavier hand. And they can instruct counties to work. They can instruct counties to request an FYI or FUP voucher for all youth who aren't, entering a transitional housing program, as part of the youth's 90-day transition plan when they leave care. Or they could request information from every county child welfare agency about the status of FYI and FUP in their county, and then provide a rationale if no housing authority partnership is in place. So I think there's some things we could do to, again, sort of spawn more energy and activity at the local level by having a kind of more of a state role in this program. So now I'm going to pass it to Amy to kind of round us out with a few federal recommendations, and then we'll jump into Q&A. See you then.
Thanks, Simone. We're almost at the finish line. Thanks everyone for hanging in there with us. Next slide, please. Our first recommendation is really to align FYI FUP vouchers with every other housing choice voucher that's made available by HUD, by making them permanent rather than time limited. We found some practical barriers that were cited by public housing authorities regarding the administration. The much kind of more significant issue, however, is the cost of housing in California. Even young people who benefit from the voucher for 5 years. We want young people to receive support as long as they need it. There may have been a rationale at some time thinking that, by the time, in 5 years, they'll be ready to enter the market. And I think there was that time. I think maybe I was even working in the field during that time. But the kind of nature of California's housing crisis has intensified to the extent that we'd prefer to see these be permanent and then have young people simply income out of them. So when they are no longer income eligible, they won't be able to have the voucher. But why have a artificial timeline that isn't aligned with the individual needs of the young person? And so that's the first recommendation we have, is let's make this voucher like every other voucher, and have it be based on the individual needs of the voucher holder rather than an arbitrary time limit. Next slide, please. The next one is to separate the FYI FUP vouchers for youth from FUP vouchers within HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Data Dashboard. And so this data dashboard is kind of like the equivalent of our CWS CMS, or like our California Child Welfare Indicators Project. It's an absolutely fabulous website where you can go and look at every housing authority in the country, every housing authority in California. You can see how many vouchers they have, what their utilization rate is, what the cost per voucher is in that housing authority or state. It's a treasure trove of information, and it's a great accountability tool. However, right now, FUP vouchers, the vouchers for youth are not distinct from the vouchers for families. And so it doesn't give us a very clear picture of this program. And so our recommendation is we've got a great tool that the federal government has created. Let's kind of refine that by separating these youth vouchers out from non-youth FUP vouchers so that we can really understand, because we're happy to do these reports. We love it. But if this change could be made, this could be part of HUD's actual data system, and everyone at all times on a real-time basis could have a very clear, accurate snapshot of what the status of this program is like in their community. So that is our second federal recommendation. Next slide, please. So before we turn to Q&A, I just want to share a exciting resource with you. This is a roster where you can learn about the status of FYI or FUP in your community. The roster provides the main point of contact for voucher referrals. So if you are a young person and you want a voucher, or you work with young people and you want to refer them, it has the right person to contact for that. It tells which housing authority the county is partnering with. If there is a service provider that the child welfare agency contracts with, that is listed as well. It also explains whether they have requested on-demand vouchers yet, because we know we're all going to be moving in that direction, but kind of as of October 1st, whether they have. And then it also says whether the PHA has the family self-sufficiency program. So, I believe someone's going to put that in the chat so that everyone has it. And we think, if you are a housing authority or if you are a child welfare agency, we've done our best to create this roster, and we will commit ourselves to keeping it accurate. So if anyone does see anything that isn't accurate, please let us know. And then, like all of the rosters on our website, we will constantly be updating this so that this can be a useful tool for everyone in California. All right, with that, we've got a lot of questions and answers to cover, and I think we're pretty much on time. So we have a full 15 minutes to get to it. So the first one is pretty straightforward, and I'm going to send this over to you, Andy. Do all youth need to be offered the additional 2-year extension? Is this a requirement for housing authorities?
Yes, 100%. That is part of that FSHO amendment that went into effect last year in 2022. Every youth is required the opportunity by the housing authority to have that extension, either again through participation in FSS or meeting one of those alternative conditions.
Okay. I'll send this to you, Simone. If the youth does not want to receive ongoing supportive services, can they still receive a voucher? So in a nutshell, are services required to participate in?
They're not required of the youth. No, they must be offered. So that does have to be coordinated for those to be offered. But if the young person has, doesn't feel that they have a need for those ongoing services, they don't have to receive them, and they should not be penalized by removal of their voucher or anything like that. No.
That's great. Thanks for that. All right, Andy, if my county child welfare agency has an existing agreement with the housing authority for FUP that was set up a long time ago, do we need to update it in order to start requesting on-demand vouchers?
No, you can use your existing MOU. It does not need to specify that the vouchers are going to be competitive or non-competitive / on-demand. You can use that existing MOU.
Okay. This one's for you, Simone. We're just going to tick through these. I appreciate your succinct answers. This is: who funds the Risk Mitigation Fund, and how do owners apply?
So that was something that some individual housing authorities may offer. It is not something that that's what we'd like to see is designated funding for things like that. So we're proposing that the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program be augmented to include funding for housing authorities, so they could have a risk mitigation fund and those other great strategies specifically for FYI FUP vouchers. Some of them may have that for other voucher programs right now, but that's something that we'd like to see happen for FYI FUP. Okay. And maybe a couple might have it for FYI FUP that maybe they're funding privately or something like that. But there's no standard happening statewide.
All right, Andy, you're going to get a big one here. I'm not sure there's one definitive answer, but I think it's a question that's certainly worth asking. If there are so many homeless youth in need of housing, why are the voucher numbers so low and there's so much red tape to get them out?
Oh boy, where do I start with that? That was a great question. I point to a lot of those findings we talked about in the report. There is a lot of work that needs to be done amongst counties, county child welfare agencies, and housing authorities to successfully request these vouchers. There is a lot of communication. There's a lot and relationship building, because this is there's a lot of parties involved in this. It's very bureaucratic. So, we encourage, again, each of those parties, those child welfare agencies, the housing authorities, to meet regularly, to get on the same page, to build out a protocol for establishing referrals, sending referrals to the housing authority, and then secondly, that big piece is, again, only a handful of these counties have implemented the on-demand process thus far. That really is, again, a wonderful tool. It allows every housing authority to request up to 50 vouchers a year, but it really needs to be operationalized. And we'd point to, again, getting all those parties on the same page and making sure that there is a system in place and those communication lines are open between child welfare agencies, the housing authorities, and potentially any other third-party service providers.
Great, thank you. All right, Simone, does the option to extend the voucher term to 5 years also extend the age limit for youth? So can they remain eligible past age 24?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question, because there was a lot of questions like in the question box about this. So I want to make sure, be clear about this. It's not like whichever comes first, 25 or the 3 years. It's 25 is just the age that they have to have the voucher by. So if they sign their housing assistance, contract before they turn 25, they're all good. They can then turn 25, turn 26, doesn't matter, with that voucher, with that housing. They've just got to be in that contract by the time they turn 25. And that applies to the extension as well. They keep on going. So it's not like, I know some people are familiar with THP Plus, where it's like 36 months or 25, whichever comes first. That's not the case. Different situation.
Great. This one, you maybe want to reflect on it, Andy, or not, but our PHA has adopted a policy wherein FUP for youth who have been stably housed for at least 2 years may graduate to a housing choice voucher, so the mainstream voucher, when they reach the end of their FUP for youth assistance. So anything you want to just reflect on that, Andy?
I saw that and I loved it. I was so happy to see that. That's very much, there's a little bit of nuance, a little bit of difference with that local recommendation that we made, encouraging local counties to transition youth to, again, a more to an alternative voucher, a non-special purpose voucher. So we're really encouraged to see that practice. And I know a lot of housing authorities in our community of practice, a lot of counties are asking questions about, what can we do when a youth ages out of this program? That is to say, once they go through the 3 to 5 years. And that's the exact example of something we can point to.
Okay. Here's a good one. I'm an attorney who represents foster youth. I'm not sure my county's probation department helps NMDs apply for these vouchers. What can I do to get the ball rolling? Call my county's PHA to ask for a voucher with my client. This is all very new to me. Well, one thing is definitely the roster. I'll answer this one. I do want to say that, there's a lot of goodwill locally. Many entities are not doing this because they don't believe in housing or they don't want to support young people making a safe, supported transition. It's literally, I think it's back to the federal government down to a discretionary local program. And so if they don't know about it, it's an opportunity to share information, share this presentation. But yeah, really start with that roster. And I would really, instead of the public housing authority, I would contact the contact in your child welfare agency. That in many of the counties, that is the entity that's really where the referral process starts, not directly to the public housing authority. All right, let's have our next question. Let's see. Simone, what is the easiest, most straightforward way to request a voucher for a former foster youth? Call the PHA of the city where the youth wants to live. I don't think I have heard the best way to refer or request.
Yeah, so I will say things do differ slightly from county to county. So I'm going to make a blanket statement, but I always say check with the local points of contact in your county. Generally, people go through the county child welfare agency. There are some cases where they've sort of designated a service provider in a contract to be that point person. for example, but we have reflected that on that roster. So in those cases that we've been told this is where it goes, we've highlighted that person as the point of contact. But whether it's current foster youth or former foster youth, I would refer to that roster, because what it has is the correct person at the agency, like kind of your point of entrance. So the County Child Welfare Agency does have to verify eligibility. So they do need to be that point of contact. And then they will get that person's information to the housing authority. So use that roster, whether you're current foster youth or former foster youth.
Okay, Andy, over to you. Can counties issue FYI vouchers to former foster youth who had a dependency in another county? Is there any policy restriction on that?
So I will answer that very broadly in saying that portability of vouchers is an option for FYI and FUP. So there is certainly an opportunity for youth to be able to port the voucher after a year in which they have the referral go through locally in their county. I don't know if Simone or Amy, you have anything else you want to add to that piece, just in terms of the intricacies behind the policies?
Sure. I think it depends if they're asking, if the youth doesn't have a voucher currently. Is that what the question says?
Right. And I think they're like from Alameda, and they're in LA now, and can they apply to LA for a voucher?
Yeah, so they would need to do that. So this all goes by location. So if you're in LA and you were in Karen, Alameda, that sort of doesn't matter. If you want to live in LA, you have to use a voucher that's in either, the city, from the city housing authority of the city you're in, or the county housing authority of the county you're in, because you do have to live within the jurisdiction of the housing authority. So if you're in LA, you request from DCFS, from LA DCFS, and they go through their housing authority. That also means that your supportive services are going to come from that county too. So everything is happening locally. That there was some confusion about this, I know, recently among some folks we've talked to, and they're like, well then, but does the original county provide the service? It's like, you are now a resident of LA and they are serving you. Like Andy said, if they already have a voucher and they want to move, that's also possible after a year to move outside of the jurisdiction, but that's sort of a different scenario.
Okay, we're kind of closing in, but I think I've got a few more highly relevant questions. This one is, I'm going to send this back to you, Simone, too. You've noted that you want to answer this one. Is there any way that HUD can expedite the process if it takes months to approve and youth are already on their way to aging out with no plan? So I think there might be a little bit of confusion on that survey data, what those months were referring to.
Yeah, I got an earlier question about that too. So there's the request that goes into HUD, and then that should turn around within a couple months. Then once that voucher comes to the community and it goes to the young person, then there's a span of time it takes to secure housing. And so that was the time that we were reporting on. But one thing that I'm already hearing our federal partner, Ruth Ann White, in my ear right now, just imagining her, this is why we request early. Shelley says, request early. Don't wait till the young person's aging out tomorrow and say, I need a voucher. Then they will end up leaving without a voucher. As soon as you hit that mark, where you can request it, you can request it within, 90 days of leaving. And I think she said you can even request it a little earlier. You can always exit the young person a few days early if you need to. Put that request in so that you're ready to go. If the youth has to leave care a month early, it's not a big deal. So if they have a voucher in hand, so make that request as early as you can.
All right, let's make this our last one, maybe our most provocative question, but why not? As an advocate working with youth, what recommendations do you have when an individual youth's request for FYI referrals are denied? And the reason giving is a lack of funding for supportive services. Do you have any recommendation for individual advocacy that would be helpful in these situations? Any thoughts, Andy or Simone?
Andy, do you want to take this one?
Would you like to lead it off? I mean, I'm going to point to what we talked about HNMP. But why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so I think first, yes, we were trying to get some more funding, so that's not even an issue raised. But I think in terms of like this individual situation today, there are many ways to fulfill the service requirement. First of all, this young person, find out what they need and want. Are they a young person who needs significant support to maintain their housing? All young people are going to need some upfront support in getting kind of successfully leased up, getting all the paperwork done, like help them through that process. That should be able to be something that someone could kind of do on an ad hoc basis for a short period of time. If you have a young person that just isn't capacity on the kind of the service provider's caseload, but find out on an ongoing basis what this young person needs and wants. They might not even want the ongoing case management or services, and that's okay. But it could be fulfilled in a number of ways. The County Child Welfare Agency must provide or secure the services. So even if there's just a community-based provider that offers some sort of support, a WIOA program, like whatever it may be, you could help this young person tap into those local supports. It could be a faith-based organization. It can kind of be anything as long as you're offering some services. So if you get in a pinch and you lose that, you don't have that capacity, I wouldn't say deny the young person a voucher. I would say get creative. And we're also happy to like reach out, and there's a myriad of other organizations in California that are really, have the same passion about like wanting to make this work and are providing technical assistance. Young Youth Law Center, California Youth Connection, like there's people that want to help. So reach out and we'll help you troubleshoot this so that that young person can get a voucher, because that we don't want them to not get a voucher because of some service capacity issue.
Thank you very much, Simone. For those. There's a lot of additional questions. I think we will pause here just to keep it on time. We will cull through these though, and if the ones that kind of surfaced more, we will answer like in some kind of document. A number of people asked specifically just about San Bernardino, and so we will make sure to answer that as well. And then you have Simone and Andy's email on there. You can definitely feel free to reach out. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be on this. And thanks for all the hearts and the claps. That's very sweet. We really appreciate it. I really, really want to also extend our thanks to all of our partners. We're one tiny piece of a much bigger puzzle of advocates, community-based organizations, public agencies, and philanthropy that are all working together to operationalize this program in California and beyond. Anything, Andy or someone you want to say before we wrap up?
Again,
Thanks.
Again, just to reiterate, yeah, I know we're seeing a lot of very individual kind of questions, this youth situation, things like that. My particular county, it is a very localized program. Counties are doing things different. They have different protocols. So feel free to reach out to me, Simone. The emails are there with more specific questions locally, and we'd love to get involved and help out.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I think that concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.